Yeah, thank you so much. And Deepak really hit what I really want to focus on. So I think that a lot of times when we take a look at AI tools, especially ones for research, there's this temptation to kind of just let them take on a lot of work and just lay back. And I understand that temptation. Although one of the things I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try to extend a lot of the things we know about AI and engaging with AI and really trying to focus on what those things mean for using it for research. Because really, when we use these tools, we have to be, and SciSpace is going to be a great one that I'm going to show you and walk through a little bit. But when we use any sort of AI research tool, we want to do it in a way that encourages us to think critically, right? And there are a couple of things that when we really put that in practice with research with AI tools that are really, really important, right? Being able to figure out where the sources are coming from. Is the program getting it from the source, or is it getting from an abstract, or is it getting from a title or from a URL, right? And sometimes it's not that easy to tell. And I'll show you some cool things you can do within this particular program to start to work through that. And I think, really make sure that our research is as accurate as it can be and that we're not falling prey to those hallucinations and errors and everything else of this. So, my name is Jason Gulya. So, I'm a professor of English and communications at Berkeley College. So, not California, Berkeley. I'm on the East Coast of the US. Um, and I'm a full-time professor and I am a researcher. So, I'm currently writing a book and a lot of it is trying to figure out how to figure out what has already been written out there. And so I'm very keen on tools that allow me to do that a little bit more quickly because for anyone who does that, or anyone who's kind of in that process of putting together just an overview of the research or a literature review, if you wanna call it that, it can be really, really hard, right? It can be really difficult to kind of do that and keep everything in one spot, and so I'm always looking for tools that allow me to do that. So that kind of just gives you a sense of how I'm approaching this, what my own angle is. So, what I'm really gonna focus on today is what a research flow looks like, right? So really, really practical, right? So thinking about if we go in and we use a program like this, how can we approach it? What can we do? And this is not going to all be about AI because I don't think it should all be about AI. A lot of it is about extending research methods, right? So, and that's going to be what I sort of lead with. So, one of the things I really want to talk about is how we create a project. Now, this is not really about AI, but it's going to help us out. And this is something that cuts across disciplines. Although we might have different ways to approach it depending on what works for us, what process has been successful in the past. So I really focus on four main things. So I'm trying to figure out what my project is and how big I can make it, or the scope of that project. So the first thing I try to do, and this is going to be really key when we go into SciSpace and see what it does, defining a question. So you're going to clarify the specific thing you want to find out. And again, this is something that this is not new to us. And then I think what will be new is how we apply it to the AI research context. So we'll want to find something, a question that is specific enough that we can do that deep dive but not so specific that it cuts out the exploration, right? And that's just kind of what we do when we create a research topic. We want to give ourselves some wiggle room because we might find out something that, hey, surprised us that we didn't think early on. And we don't want to lose that based off of the research question. Then thinking about the methods, right? So, what is the best way I can do this? I also talk about this as a process. What is your research process? So, if I want to say, I'll just use my own example, write a book about process based teaching and alternative assessment. So, say I wanted to do that, what sort of process can I go through that will allow me to do that? And this depends on your discipline, right? If you're teaching reading and writing, that's going to be different than if you're, say, in STEM or in, the hard sciences or anything like that. And then, and many of us may know this already, or if you are, say, a PhD student, it's kind of given to you, right? Decide what the final output is going to look like, what you actually want at the end of it. So this is all design thinking, right? What is your research question? What do you want to end up with? What is the end goal? And how are you going to get there? That's the kind of backward design that a lot of us do just naturally as a part of the research process. And then the last thing, which I think is so key, what are your constraints? Now, these can be constraints on the project. These can also be constraints on just you, right? Say you're trying to get something done in the next year. Well, how does that affect how you're going to go about researching it? And I think that we need to be honest with ourselves. If we are doing a project that's going to take 5 years versus something that's going to take a year or 6 months, that kind of changes how we can go about approaching it. All right. So, and a lot of this has been predicted already. And so this is going to be about me kind of adding a little bit to it, but taking the threads that just came out of that poll and figuring out how can we act on them. One of the things I'm going to try to do in this session is I'm going to try to make it very, very practical. That anything I talk about, there's a way to act on, right? It means something for how we engage with these systems. So most AI tools right now in 2025 are sycophantic, and they're sycophantic by their very design. There are ways to push against them, but in the end, and so sycophantic basically means that it's going to do what you tell it to do. It's going to try to figure out what answer you want. And AI research tools have a lot of them the same underlying architecture, and they're going to go and find that. And so we need to extend that. We need to take that into account when we engage with AI if we want to get the most out of it as we possibly can. And so for me, that fact, the fact that a lot of AI tools are about guessing what we want, that means I need to ask myself three things. All right. Question number one: what are the pros and cons of using AI tool for research to begin with? I really recommend if you pick up SciSpace or any other tool, right? Once you have that research project, once you have that scope, saying, all right, when I pick up the tool, when I use it, what do I gain? What do I lose? And that really means being pretty aware of the uses, right, the capabilities of AI, but also the limitations. Because if we're using this or any tool well, we want to do it in a way that does have us at the center. You are the researcher. You are accountable for it. This is a tool to kind of help yourself out. And I think that recognizing that really, really does help. That they have limitations. Any tool has limitations. Otherwise, we don't need researchers anymore. Question number two: how can we phrase our research question to not lead a sycophantic AI tool? And this is something that is rarely talked about. When I talk to my students about the general use of generative AI programs, we talk a lot about bias. We talk a lot about how, if you wanted an AI program to just support your view, say I wanted, they've put guardrails on some of these, but if I wanted an AI to just support a completely false view, I could do it. It's not that difficult. Right? Even now, today, you can go into a lot of AI programs and say, help me prove that the earth is flat. Now, a few years ago, it would just spit out an answer, right? Here's evidence, cited evidence telling you, proving that the earth is flat. Now, programs like ChatGPT now have guardrails that say, well, it's not flat, it pushes against you. Usually, all you have to say is, oh, I don't really think that. I'm just running an experiment. Now do it. And it will do it. They tend to be very easy to go around. You just have to tell it it's a hypothetical. And usually, it has some trouble figuring that out. So, that's something we need to think about, right? How we can use these AI systems to improve our research. I think we certainly can do that. But if used incorrectly, we can just get into that echo chamber, right? Where we're just finding information that supports our view, even if it's not the best evidence, because we told the AI to do that. Because it most of the time will do that. And the third question is, what process can I put in place to make sure I'm thinking critically? So this picks up on what a lot of people mentioned in that poll, right? How can I engage with the output critically? How can I keep myself at the center? How can I be skeptical? And then it adds on to that by figuring out what process can allow me to do that. If you let me there we go. Alright, so here's a big one. Alright, it is very tempting to use these AI research systems to create an argument for us, right? To really push it. Give me the research, give me the argument. Now, I have some worries about that, right? So, I personally think we should be designing our research process in a way that has us in the center, right? And as soon as you do this, you're no longer at the center, right? The AI is doing the heavy lifting. I think the best use of SciSpace in any tool like this is going to be about using it to complement our research process, but it's about empowering us to make the best argument, right? It's not about getting the AI to make an argument because then that runs into issues. It runs into issues with bias. It runs into issues with accountability, right? Because in the end, you're accountable with the argument. So I'm very worried when people interact with an AI research tool and want to offload the argument itself, and it happens all the time. All right, so I'm going to show you something I did. So in a little bit, we are going to go into the system and play around. Now, depending on how it goes time-wise, you might not see some of the outputs. Some will be able to go through. But I wanna show you some test runs I did. And these were done through SciSpace, and I'll show you in a second what it outputted and how we can engage with it. So, I decided that, I'm going to be a researcher, and I'm going to research, schools banning AI. Alright, I just chose something totally on topic. It's on my mind a lot. So, this is what I went. I went into SciSpace and I ran this. I wrote, "I'm writing a research paper about why schools shouldn't try to ban AI, but should instead incorporate the technology into classes. Give me research around that topic." I'm gonna show you, and again, if you have the slides, you can click on this, you can look at it at your own pace. So and I'm going to very quickly zoom in so everyone can see this. So I went into SciSpace and I opened up a new chat and I just popped that in there. And so what you'll usually see, which does help, it will more often than not give you clarifying questions. So if you are struggling with the research question, the research topic, it will kind of nudge you. It won't, and it shouldn't fix a bad research question or a bad research project, but it can start to set parameters around it a little bit more, right? Set limits a little bit more. And so you can see it sent in some clarifying questions. What's the level? What are the pedagogical aspects? Geographic and cultural context. Good. And I sent in my responses. And this is what I got back. So it initiated the comprehensive. Oh, it's giving you the steps that it did through. And then if I scroll down, that's just steps, what it did, what it found. And it puts it here. So you get to that process. It gives you the too long, didn't read, and tells you AI integration in US college courses has produced measurable gains in engagement, writing processes, and course performance in multiple empirical pilots, while institutions, oh my gosh, I wish I had prompted it with style, provide guidance rather than blanket bans. Researchers recommended scaffolded adoption, faculty development, and ethics process policies to implement AI responsibly. All right, so we're going to keep those critical thinking things up, right? Those critical AI, those critical thinking skills up. Apparently, I'm going to trip over my words. So here, I have a bunch of questions already, right? It starts to create these groups of researchers. They're not saved yet. They'll be later on in the report. But you can see what it did is I led it. I led it to an answer. I gave it the exact argument I wanted, and I told it, go find those things. And so what you'll find is it's an AI bot, right? So it's going to follow that. It's going to guess what I want. So here, what you can see is it walks through the positive learning outcomes. It gives some citations, right? Implementation strategies and frameworks. Like it's pretty good. And it does give me some things I didn't directly ask for, right? Which is kind of the benefit of a program like this. It tries to guess what I want, what would help me out. So implementation strategies, design principles, and it's probably still a little small, so I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more. All right, so hopefully you can read that a little bit more. Practical steps forward, faculty adoption practices. So there are a couple of problems here. The first problem is I'm not getting a general sense of the size involved. So if I were doing this own research project, this is where I fall into the habit of I just feed it an argument and it goes and it creates it for me, right? We kind of here I lead the program into it. And then also I didn't give it that much information about what I wanted it to produce. I just said I'm doing a project. Here's my argument. Give me the evidence that supports that argument. And there are different ways to prompt it to help yourself out. So prohibition versus integration evidence. So all that it comes up with makes perfect sense, right? Given the prompt I sent in. And then at the very bottom, it does very nicely. And I think almost every SciSpace run I've done does this. It puts it into a table, right? The study and the setting, the methodology, the key empirical findings, and implementation recommendations. So this is all with a pretty generic prompt, and then you have the references at the bottom. Now, I did another test run. And again, you can see, if you have the slides, you can click through and see the different outputs. So I did a second test run, and this time I use what I often call the grit formula, right? So my idea is that if we're using SciSpace, we want to have a process that gets us to do the hard work when that hard work is useful, right? The AI program is there to help us with some of the research, some of the grunt work, but in the end, we want to be doing the heavy lifting because we are accountable for the research. So grit, goal, role, instructions, tone. And even when I looked at the response I just got, right, it's the tone gets to me, right? The tone gets to me because it's just giving it to me in um, AI tone of writing. So what I did here is I ran the same kind of query, but I gave it more specificity, right? The goal is to end this conversation with an improved sense of the issues surrounding the banning of AI in public schools in the US. This way, I can create a stronger argument on my own, right? So, this is what I want. So, if you're doing a research topic, let it know at the end of this chat, this is the ideal situation, right? The role, um, and one of the things I recommend when you create a role, and even now in prompting, people never talk about this, give it a role and give yourself a role, right? You can say, I want you to be this, and I'm going to be this. That's okay, right? That actually helps because now you have two roles. It's not just one, right? So the role here, you are an expert researcher who's trained to do a full dive into both sides of an issue so that I can make up my own mind and create my own argument. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a boundary. I'm telling the AI bot, you're going to do this. I'm going to do this. This is going to be our exchange. This is going to be our interaction. And so you set yourself up. You're going to get a better output here because you're letting it know what your role is, right? It's most of the time not going to just take away that role. So that's really important. And even now, it's rarely talked about, but it's super important, especially for research prompts. Instructions. Here, this is where I really let it know, right, what I wanted to do. Look into the research topic, report back these specific things, right? What are some concerns? That's A. B, what reasons for both sides based on pedagogy, right? So here I let it know it's about teaching. That's what I want us to focus on. And then C, specific links between this conversation and the conversation about banning phones in school. So you can see how this is doing two things. One, it's asking SciSpace to do a bigger perimeter, right? So that it's looking at both the good and the bad. It's looking at both sides. But then also, I'm directing it by being more specific, right? I'm not telling it the exact argument. I want to look at both sides, but I do want to make sure it looks at the connection between AI bans and cell phone bans. Is that connection legitimate? I often wonder that, right? What if people have written about that already? And then this is for my own sanity too, the tone. Present both sides of the argument, link all of your claim specific evidence that you cite. Don't blab. It's kind of it's a little bit of a hack. Don't blab, don't generalize. And this is what I got that was a bit different. All right, I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit. So I popped that in here. I got clarifying questions. And the clarifying questions themselves, and this is where I think you're on the right track. If the clarifying questions are pretty broad, it probably means your research question is too broad. If they're more specific, well, then that usually means you're on the right track, right? So here, those clarifying questions look very, very different, right? For the first one, it was mostly who, what, why, right? Very generic clarifying questions. Here, educational level focus, AI technology scope, right? Do you want me to talk about generative AI or do you want me to talk about AI more broadly, machine learning? Like, how broad do you want it to be? Stakeholder perspective priority, right? That's when I looked at these clarifying questions that I thought, I'm on to something here. This is a very specific clarifying question, right? And there also is just more to them, right? And time frame for evidence. So, and there too, right? It allows me to say, I want 2022 to 2025, right? It gives me those parameters. So the more, I think in many ways, the better your first prompt, the better the clarifying questions will be. And then the better the output is going to be. So I let it know, college, let's focus on it in general. So I didn't want to just focus on generative AI. I want the big picture. I'm going to show you a little bit about what it did. So here, same thing. It went through the process. Let me know, this is the research it did. This is what it found. This is what it's looking through. All right. So it's walking me through the process. And then it did so much more. It did so much more work than the other one, which is good. All right. So too long didn't read. Two recent randomized survey policy and qualitative studies show trade-offs. You can immediately feel the difference, right? Immediately feel the difference, even in the summary itself, right? It tells me decision should weigh assessment design, equity, and faculty capacity, right? So it's giving me very specific pieces of information, and the style, the tone of the writing is so different. So decision-making concerns. So students' learning outcomes and institutional goals shape whether to ban AI, right? So right off the bat, it's letting me know, right, what concerns I should focus on, right? What are the outcomes we want students to get? What are the institutional goals? And that is far more nuanced than the other one. Because what that suggests is that the way we approach AI isn't just as is, it depends on where you're teaching. If you are at a liberal arts college, maybe your approach is different than if you're at a technical college, right? And things like that. So it allows much more nuance, and that's because of the research question itself. All right, so here, grade versus learning trade-off, police heterogeneity and signaling, course level implementation burden. So much more specific pieces of information. And then here I have pedagogical arguments, and it breaks them down. Here's the variable. Here's the evidence supporting the bans. Here's the evidence against bans. Here are the key studies. So if I'm going through this, one of the first things I am doing is I'm going into that table and I'm clicking on these key studies. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in terms of my process. So one of the things that I like to do is I look at the table, I look at key studies, and here you can see exactly where it came from. So I'm going to click on it. And so I have a couple of options, right? I can ask for the PDF, I can get a podcast, or I can just save it so that I can take a look at it later. So there's a lot of information here, right? And I actually have a system that I use for giving, yellow flags and green flags. So here, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute and kind of show you an example. All right, but here you can see that is the general pattern. So the focus on critical thinking, here's the good, here's the bad, and here are the sources. You can click around and get those directly. And as you go through, I recommend looking at this, looking at if it has the PDF there already. Some do, some don't, and others you have to ask for it. And that's key, and I'll talk about why in a few minutes. But for me, and here you have the key nuance findings and trade offs. And again, if you have the slides, you can look through it on your own. But for me, this is much more useful, right? Even by having this grit method. So again, goal, role, instructions, tone, it gives me something that is far more usable. So how do I use it? Once I have this done, what sort of process? And I want to pop into the chat. Oh, yes. Yeah, and I'll walk through like what to do once you have that done. So I'm gonna pop back into the slides. So once you have that, once you've gone the through SciSpace and you have that output, what do you do with it? Here's my set of tricks for you. And I'm gonna apply them to SciSpace. And I think it makes it very, very useful. So with that in mind, right, with that framework, you can get just better research, right? Especially when you're not offloading the argument, you're just getting both sides of something or multiple sides of something. That's why this is really, really useful. It pulls that out, and that can be very hard to do on your own. And then I read things out of order. I do. I don't start at the top and read down. I look at the citations first. Do they seem okay? Do they seem off? Then secondly, I scan through to see the citations and I click on them. And this is what I'm going to show you in a minute, right? If I can access the article directly through SciSpace, I give it for the moment a green flag, right? Like, cool, I can get that. I can get that right now. If I can't access it directly, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I give it a yellow flag. Right. And one of the reasons I do that is when we use an AI research tool, we have to try to figure out. Sometimes the AI research tool has direct access to that article, the whole thing, and is running it through basically a summary engine. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it may not have direct access to that article. And then the question is, well, maybe I have to do additional verification, right? And that's all this is about, right? That YOLO flag allows you to say, I really need to verify that, get that source, do a little bit more of a dive, right? And that's important, right? Figuring out what to verify and what is probably okay. And then number three, I engage with it critically and I use those follow-up messages. So I'm going to go back into what I just showed you. So this is, all right, I think this is the right one. Yes. All right. So this is the one I just ran. So I went through, and again, if I were doing this, so I ran that prompt, the first thing I'm doing is I am going, let me scroll all the way to the bottom. I'm going to the very bottom. So I'm going to look at those citations. All right. So I can do a lot of work just with this. So criminal justice education, cool, pretty good, right? So green, for the moment, a green flag, right? Here, not 100% sure where number two is from. All right, so I need to check that. All right, so number three, I'm not 100% sure. All right, cool. So number four, so general artificial intelligence in higher education, why the banning approach, cool. So seems okay, right? But I may have to do some additional sleuthing, right? And then number six looks mostly okay. Number five looks mostly okay. So this is one of the big things that we can do, right? If we can see, and same with number eight, right? So it's from contemporary educational technology. And so here, this is where we start to really save some time. That we can say, here are some sources that it found. I'm going to take a look at it. All right. So that's the first thing I do. Second thing I do, and I mentioned this already, I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at this table. This is very, very useful. And I'm going to look at those key studies. So here, I can click on here. And I'll take a second. Sometimes it's usually pretty quick. Actually, I'm going to take this as a second to make sure. If it'll actually let me share my audio. Maybe it won't. That's okay. So no big deal. So here I'm able to take a look at it. It's going to check if it can get it for me. And this is one thing that's very, very useful, right? So here it does have access to the PDF, so I can request it from the authors, or I can download it from the library. I can also just save it to take a look at it later. I'm going to save it. I'll just put it in my notebook. All right. So you can create folders from there and pop it in there, and you can always look at it later. All right. So for others, you can go and you can simply click around. You can do the same thing. You can use this tool to make your life a little bit easier. You can see, you can request PDFs, you can do podcasts. All right. This is what I wanted to find. So I went to number 10. This gets a green flag for me in many ways because I can click here. And in some ways, it's going to be similar, right? I can generate a podcast and it has not get PDF, it has a link directly to the PDF, right? So that signals to me a couple of things. One, that makes it easy to just find that right there, right? SciSpace took me right there. I'm actually still within the SciSpace umbrella, still technically in their website, right? Even though I'm able to access the PDF of the article. And also, when I go through and say I want to chat with the paper or do a podcast, I know it has access to the entirety of that article. And here, right, you can chat with the paper, right? You can ask it to explain the abstracts, come up with conclusions for the paper, come up with results from the paper. And all of this makes it quite a bit easier, right? It makes your life easier as a researcher. And that's a lot of it too, right? So being able to say, look at the citations at the bottom, go up, see where those links are, and click on them. And again, like some, it might say get the PDF. So for me, that's a yellow flag. I wanted to look into that. And then others, just PDF, and you can immediately get it within this SciSpace website. And from there, I start to create buckets, right? These are ones I want to save. I know are pretty reliable. Here are ones I want to make sure I'm verifying, right? I'm doing that additional work. And then the other thing that I mentioned in terms of critical engagement, right? Because I talked about the prompt. I talked about, and let's scroll down to the bottom here. All right, I talked about the prompt. I talked about doing that sleuthing, right? Trying to verify things, trying to find where things are from, and then also use those follow-up messages. They're so key, right? So I think it's so tempting to focus on that initial prompt. We want it to be big, we want it to be specific and everything, but it's also okay to kind of build as you go along. All right, so I can say these are good overall. I just thought about something. What about, and I'll just put something random here, students' personal rights. Flesh things out with that concern. Right. And so here I might say, well, maybe that's a concern we missed. But what if people have written about it? So, and this is where we can really engage with it critically. Here, what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out where the gap might be, and then how can I push it? And so I did this through deep research. But if you have the free version, right, there are other ways to do it. It will do the same sort of searching. It might not be quite as advanced. Um, but you can do versions of this, right? Even if you're not using an agent. Um, and let's see, it might take a little while to do this, but basically all I want to focus on is that those follow-up messages are a way to critically engage with this. All right. It keeps us in a skeptical mode, and it kind of recognizes that so much of how we use SciSpace is how we direct it. Whether we're telling it, do that dive, focus on something that's missing, anything like that. I'm gonna pop away for a little bit while it does its thing, because I know we only have about 10 minutes, and I do want to give people a chance to ask me questions if you want. All right. And that was kind of my test run, that follow-up message. And I also have the link to SciSpace directly on there. So if you want to play it on your own, create an account, test it out, anything like that, you can do that on your own. But those follow-up messages kind of my test run, which hopefully, yeah, it might take a minute. That's okay.